I remember the first time my dad told me I was ugly, I was 10, and they would put me on starvation diets. So there were women's Bible study weight loss groups where women would come together, and the whole thing was to get right with God about your weight. It was a long process of separating thinness from godliness, or thinness from goodness.
First question is, how are you feeling right now?
I was thinking about this morning how a few years ago, I never would have been comfortable doing something like this. One of my biggest personal struggles has been behind my appearance, my weight, and my body. And in conjunction with that, I wouldn't have felt comfortable being really vulnerable about my story because I was afraid of it and insecure about it. And so it's a really cool growth moment for me to realize that I'm not only okay with the interview, I'm really excited to talk about it. And it feels good in this moment to feel so free.
Can you talk about what your style says about you?
I think that joy is often one of the most overlooked powers that we have as people. It's a form of rebellion, especially when there's so much around you that makes you want to stay stuck. No matter what's around me, I choose myself. I choose vibrance in this moment. And for me, fashion is a huge part of that because I'm going to accept myself every day, even when I'm told I shouldn't, or it seems like it doesn't matter, because when it seems like it doesn't matter is exactly when it matters the most. I spent a lot of my life making myself smaller or quieter or more reserved or trying to fit into a specific appearance. And now it's just about the celebration of all the little things I find beautiful. I wore costume jewelry because I love statement pieces. I love brightness and I love conversation. I love this little kind of gothic piece poking out here. There's the rock and roll, and I love how tall it makes me feel and almost regal in a way. Like these pants they're just so beautiful. And so I kind of mixed those all together today.
And how about your unbelievable, spectacular nails?
It was just one of those pieces that used to make me so self-conscious that now I just love. Like, I love my hands, and I love the size of my hands, and I love big, beautiful nails.
You said that you didn't always dress this way, that this is something that you've come into. Can we hear a little bit about what that means?
I grew up in far-right Christian nationalism in the 90s and the advent of extreme purity culture. I had to make sure I was covered up so that I didn't cause men to sin. I was also taught that my body wasn't mine, it was my future husband's. And there was also this idea of thinness was next to godliness. And I was overweight when I was a kid. And I was viciously ridiculed about that, especially by my father. He would criticize my looks and tell me I was never gonna be as pretty as my sisters. So growing up, there was so much fear around what felt like the evilness of my body. And I got to a place in my mid-20s, and I remember I was trying to sleep at night, and I was like, I have hated myself my whole life, and I am so tired, and it's never good enough. What do I want? I have done everything right. I have lived my life doing what everyone told me to do and dressing how everyone told me to dress and being ridiculed if I didn't. And I started writing music as part of that process, and like I'm gonna buy this leather jacket that's maybe a little more than I should spend. Or, wow, you know what? I don't look hideous in a crop top. Maybe I can wear a crop top to the gym. And it was these little tiny steps of falling in love with things and kind of discovering my personal style from there. And it was a very healing journey, and it took about a decade.
Can you talk about assumptions that people make about you based on how you look?
I get a lot of assumptions that I'm overtly sexual or into kink, a lot of very questionable DMs. I can tell that you're hypersexual. You're probably insatiable in the bedroom, which is a weird thing to say to a stranger that you don't know. Like, you don't know anything about my sexuality. I knew that that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is, how dare you? How dare you not fit what I think a woman should look like? Someone who is radically self-accepting makes people who haven't gotten there yet in their journey very uncomfortable, because they want you to be as uncomfortable as they are. The more that I've refused to do that and participate in that, the more vitriolic the response has gotten. I will occasionally clap back, because I think it's important to have the dialogue. Because the stupider I make you feel for saying that, the less likely you are to walk up to another woman and say it. I'm making something in you uncomfortable when I haven't done anything to you. That is your problem, not mine. You know, a boundary is a fence that you put up on your own lawn, not someone else's. And it's like, you will not conduct yourself that way in my space. You also won't make me feel ashamed of who I am. And I have a really close relationship with shame, and that's not a place I'm willing to go again. And typically, there's a lot of silence when you actually directly respond to it. Thank you. I'm just sweating, and so now I can't grab it.
What would you say is your biggest insecurity that you have overcome or that you're still working on?
My biggest crippler that held me back in my career, in my art, in relationships, was I was so deeply insecure about how I looked. And I remember the first time my dad told me I was ugly, I was 10. And he told me, you'll never be as pretty as your sisters, so you need to try harder. And he made me start wearing makeup at 12, and they would put me on starvation diets, and then I fell into anorexia nervosa. Just terrified that I would gain weight again, and terrified that I was like so hideous, and that if I had an extra pound on me, then I was absolutely disgusting and nobody would ever love me. And I would hear those things that my dad would say, replay over and over and over, well into my 20s. I lost a lot of life on that one issue. It was a long process of separating thinness from godliness, or thinness from goodness. And I started to kind of play and like show a little skin and realize the sky didn't fall, and nobody came up to me and yelled at me or bullied me or ridiculed me. People would compliment something you wore, and that was a new thing for me. And that feeling beautiful and powerful weren't sins either. It wasn't vanity, it wasn't selfishness. There's no morality around my weight.
And is that really common in like Christian alt-right?
Very. I grew up like very far right. My family was the kind of family that stockpiled arms against the government. We had caches of weapons and munitions. We were told a lot of times that the Democrats or that the government would come and hold us at gunpoint and asked us if we believed in God. And it was our obligation to say yes and die for Christ. I grew up in a church that didn't believe in marital rape. They believed that a woman, once you were married, you did not have the right to tell your husband no. I can't count how many times I heard sermons about gossip, never heard a sermon about sexual assault. We were raised to be wives. That was it, wives and mothers, wives and mothers. And women would be fairly openly rebuked if they let themselves go. So there were women's Bible study weight loss groups where women would come together, and the whole thing was to get right with God about your weight. And so I grew up in this environment of like less than but. You can see this in the current administration. They place women who fit a certain aesthetic in positions of power so they can say, see, we include women. Those women become the spoonful of sugar that helps the poison go down. And when I was growing up, my dad, he wanted me to go to law school to become a Supreme Court judge to overturn Roe. He wanted me to be Amy Coney Barrett. In Christian nationalism, you're taught that America is a Christian nation and that it's Christians' duty to control every facet of government, and that by doing so, then we can usher in the end times and the return of Christ. They're very calculated. They have been working on this for 50 years because everything that they told me in the 90s they were going to do, they are now doing. I remember walking in from school the day my mom had left. She left my dad for another man. But because my dad won full custody of all 6 of us, we've never really been in each other's lives. I've seen her 4 times since I was 7. My father was very, very clear from the get-go that you're either on my side or you're on hers. My brother and I were forced to live in a dark basement for 2 years, where we weren't allowed to come upstairs unless we were leaving the house or cleaning it. My brother and I had to memorize front and back pages of verses every week, or you would get beaten if you didn't memorize your verses well enough. My dad had this long wooden spoon that was called the spoon of inspiration. They also teach you in fundamentalism that you're born sinful, you're inherently evil. Any questioning that you have about this religion or what's being taught is your ego defying God. And so I grew up thinking that any issue I had with the abuse, knowing that this was wrong, like I just made this assumption, oh, that's just my ego. This is how every family is. I didn't know any better. And in this type of belief system in fundamentalism, the father is the absolute authority. There's no debating the father. There's no questioning. Only men can teach and lead. So the word of God comes from your pastor to you or from your father to you. I was in this environment that told me that as a woman, I didn't have any control. And feminists especially were demonized. Especially my church hated feminists because the church can't survive without the free labor of women. So the first time that I got kicked out of Sunday school, I was 9, and I was wearing a sleeveless dress. And I was being told by the instructor that my clothes could cause a man to sin. No discussion about why a man's sexually attracted to a 9-year-old. But I asked the teacher and I said, aren't men supposed to be leaders? And she said, yeah. And I said, then why aren't we expecting them to lead themselves? And she asked me to leave. I was never welcome back in her class. And then shortly after that was the first time I heard a wives submit to your husbands sermon. I'm sitting in this sermon, I'm sitting next to my dad, just fuming, listening to this pastor go on and on about the subjugation of women, and you need to submit, and you need to keep the house clean, and you need to meet his sexual needs, and you need to look this way. I remember going into my bedroom to change out of my church dress, and I took my Bible and I threw it across the room, and I said, I will never get married. If that is what I have to do, I won't get married. Anything that I thought might be sinful, I got really good at taking that energy and putting it somewhere else. I don't remember ever having sexual urges as a teenager. Ever. I was so repressed. Like even when I was dating my boyfriend in my senior year in high school, if I had like any kind of feeling, like anything, I would go run and run and run and run until I couldn't run anymore. I can look back at it now and realize that was my response to these teachings about women. I didn't like the temperature of these relationships.
So what was like the breaking point from this ideology?
When I was engaged, his half-sister got pregnant, and she was 12. And we find out that she had been being abused by her mother's boyfriend for 3 years. So it started when she was 9. His parents called me at one point, and they said, hey, we're not gonna get back from work in time. Can you take her to this, it was like this birthing class for teen girls. But I'm sitting in this room, the oldest girl was 19, most of them were 15, 16, and then she was 12. All of the fathers, except for one, were adult men. None of them were there. Where are the men? And I'm looking at this little girl. She is a child. And in my head, I'm like, Monte, this is wrong. There is no just God in the universe who would make this little girl who has been raped for 3 years carry to term when it could kill her. It was the very first time that I thought to fact check my dad and my pastors. I went on a deep dive about abortion in the United States. And I remember the first statistic I saw was that 93% of abortions happen before 14 weeks. And I was shocked because I had been told my whole life that women were coming in at 7, 8, 9 months getting abortions. I believed at that time, at 23 years old, that after birth abortions were real. And I was furious because I'm like, you intentionally lied to me. And all of you with all of your morality and you talk about caring about kids, where are you for these girls who have been sexually assaulted. Where are you? We have women bleeding out in Texas because of these laws that are made up on the Christian belief that the data doesn't support. The Bible doesn't support it either. As with most people who go through this type of deconstruction, once one issue falls, it's a house of cards. Those issues start falling really quick. For me, what really came through was, isn't faith supposed to make us better? I went to a Christian boarding school and then I went to Liberty University. Yeah, Liberty University. Oh yeah, Jerry Falwell School. It's so embarrassing. But when I showed up at Liberty, I would wear a Confederate flag keychain on my backpack. And I would argue with anybody who was willing to listen about the Civil War was about states' rights. That was what I was taught, was that slavery really wasn't that bad. For the most part, slave owners were really kind to their slaves. And they ministered to their slaves and brought them into Christianity. And so I went to school with this idea, and a friend of mine pulled me to the side. And he said, "Why do you do that?" Like, "What do you mean? Why do you walk around with that?" "Oh, well, it's history and it's states' rights." And he's like, "How do you think Black people feel when they see that flag?" I'd never thought about that. I took that keychain off, threw it in the trash. I studied a lot of history, a lot of church history, a lot of American history. And the more I found out, the sadder I got. I had a lot of shame because I realized how complicit I was in it. How I had parroted beliefs that were like inherently racist, that were inherently dehumanizing. It doesn't matter what I believed or that I was lied to. I caused harm. And learning about that system and my participation in it was really heartbreaking. But that's necessary to change. And I remember in 2016, so Trump's first, campaign, one of the things my dad hammered home my whole life was the evils of adultery. And this guy comes on the scene. I'm watching the Christians who taught me, love your neighbor, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. I am watching all of these people follow maybe the most evil person I've ever seen in my life. And to my dad's credit, my dad hated Trump. That was the moment I realized I needed to have a conversation with my dad, like a really open conversation about where I was at. The fact that I was pro-LGBT, that I was pro-choice, that I did not buy into the subjugation of women. And the week after I made the decision that I was going to have a conversation with my dad, he died. I was in a boxing lesson. I missed a call from my dad. I call him back. He's like, "Oh, I butt dialed you. I'm sorry." He was out on a dirt bike and he had fallen over and like accidentally butt dialed me. I'm like, "Dad, you are 60 years old. Why are you on a dirt bike?" And I was getting ready to release my first EP. He's heard my music and he said, "I want you to know that I am so proud of you. I have never seen someone work as hard for what they want as you do." And that was the last thing my dad ever said to me. Despite the abuse and despite my dad's shortcomings, I loved my father. And he was the only parent I had. He's the person who gave me the first of what would become my own faith. I fell into alcoholism. I was so scared and I was so broken. And February 17th of 2017, I planned to kill myself. And I had emptied my locker at work that day, didn't tell anybody. I had written letters to my family and to my roommates. I was planning to do it in the early morning hours so that everybody would be asleep. And I had this moment of clarity, just like the smallest sliver of there's something else to live for. And I thought of my oldest sister and knowing that there was one person who loved me enough that it would devastate them if I was gone. I was able to not do it that night. And after that, I was like, I need help. And I went to grief counseling and I went and got therapy and I got sober. That was when I was finally able to sit and look at my father and his life. He spent his entire life trying to get his father to love him. I can see that he was terrified and unhappy, and he felt unworthy and unloved his entire life. You know, in the book of Esther, when Esther's afraid to go to the king because she's worried that she's going to die, but she has to do it to defend her people. Mordecai looks at her and he says, maybe you were put in this position for such a time as this. All of the things I couldn't make sense of growing up, like why did I grow up in abuse? Why did all these things, horrible things happen? And I've never been more sure of my calling and my purpose than I am right now, because my entire life was for such a time as this. Because my life was built to have these conversations. In December of 2024, I made this cheeky video saying, I don't know why we're putting the Bible in schools when it's not working in churches. Made a lot of people real mad. I see this one comment from this guy named Derek, who says, when have you been to church? I'm guessing never. And I pulled my Bible into the shot, my Bible that is highlighted and marked and written in and like worn out from how many times I have read it. And I read that man for filth. And I left and went about my day. I was working, came back, and there was 4.9 million views on it. What it's shown me is how many of us there are, people that grew up like me. Something that's really important to me on my platform, and I say it all the time. I'm like, fact check me. Don't believe me because I say it. Like, one of the things about the way that Christian nationalism has been taught in America is it teaches you to not trust your own mind. If someone's afraid of questions, it's because they know their argument doesn't hold water. You have to be able to trust your own mind.
What is your relationship to like spirituality, faith today?
I am rapturously in love with the teachings of Christ. Like, if you strip away all the miracles, all the divinity, and you just look at how he lived and what he taught, it is so foundationally beautiful. But I also think that there is so much more expansiveness to spirituality than Christian fundamentalism has given. Christianity in America, as we know it, has taken Jesus and taken God, and we have put it in this teeny tiny little box. I think it's way bigger than that. When you're able to relinquish that, there is so much freedom and there's so much healing. It's scary because a lot of times those expectations or those guardrails, those rules that life is supposed to be played by, feel safe. But it's not a guardrail, it's a cage. I think that we are in a place where spirituality means we can ask a lot of questions. But for me, my foundation is those teachings of Christ. And I know that that's influenced based on how I grew up, but they're good in and of themselves, in their own ethic.
When do you feel the most beautiful?
I feel the most beautiful and the most alive when I'm on stage. It doesn't matter if there's 3 people in the room or a packed house. My dad also, his whole life, wanted to be a professional musician and a writer and never pursued it because his dad told him, well, good sons come home and take care of the ranch. And my dad hated ranching, but he spent his whole life doing it. And after watching his life and watching how it ended, I was like, I can't do that. What was hardest for me to deprogram was that pleasure isn't bad. It took a long time to be able to physically connect with someone. And when I was able to, was a really magical experience. And then when I was 31, I realized, I don't think that straight women think about women that way. I think I'm actually bisexual. I didn't feel any shame or upset or anger. It was just like, oh, that makes sense. And that was the last thing to die. That was the last little thing that held on for that long.
Okay, last question.
Oh boy.
Why in your body, in your skin, in your being, in your journey, why is it a good place to be?
Because the possibilities are endless. And I love the change in my relationship with my body to being something I had to put up with, something I had to punish and change, to something I get to celebrate.
How do you feel now?
I feel great. A large part of my followers are women who are deconstructing in various ways. For me, part of the power of it was I want to sit here in this space for and with them so that they can sit in this space. Because I couldn't have done this 5 years ago.